Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Sunday. It's the Psychedelic Roundtable. We're here with all the usual suspects. We'll have some more coming in as the night progresses. Thanks for being here. Well, gentlemen, should we just go around the horn for everybody who may not know who people are? Let's go. Ben, let's start with you, my friend. How's it going? Tell people about you just in case they don't know.
BenjaminCGeorge.com is where you can find me. Host of the No Absolutes podcast, writer of some books, and just happy to be at another Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We're stoked to have you. Jason, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great. Jason with experienceintegration.com. Been doing our thing. We've been talking masculinity on the podcast with my partners called Telling Secrets, and getting ready to launch another one. Got my first 2 guests booked, so feeling pretty stoked about that. So some pretty cool stuff coming down the pipeline on that front.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to check it out. Paul, how are things in Maui?
Good. I'm towing a tiny house. But good.
Nice.
Best intro
Nice.
ever. You can't one up that. Like,
Got the right picture for
For-
it, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So I don't know how long
Nice.
I'm going to be able to hang with you guys today, but I'll give it a shot.
All right. Well, let's pick up where we were, man. For those that just tuning in right now, we were kind of getting into out here in Hawaii. Like, we should be the number one place that legalizes drugs, cannabis, mushrooms, but we're not. Why do you think that is, Paul?
I think there's too much money being made on the black market. I think they're trying to protect, black market growers and producers. There's a lot of rural spaces around here, especially like on Maui County, where people have been making money growing weed and selling it for a very long time. And I think they are, in some ways doing the right things by trying to protect those guys. And in other ways, it's kind of a detriment to our community over here by not having, psychedelics and like marijuana more accessible.
Out of
Yeah.
curiosity, what do they charge for an ounce in Maui
Of what?
of cannabis?
Like at there's only two dispensaries here.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say it's like 300.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like 100 black market, 150, depends on who you get it from.
Interesting. That's, I see routinely in Colorado, especially up in Denver, people will be selling ounces for $60-$70 sometimes.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand, the floodgates have been opened in Colorado. Like,
Pretty
people
well.
are just, growing.
Yeah, but it's all so it's happening in Colorado. I've heard it's happening in California. I know it's definitely happening down in like New Mexico because I know a couple growers in those places. And what's happening is a lot of people are growing, but the regulations that they're putting in place, the testing requirements, and then, people who are trying to grow who aren't like a big corporation who, submit all of this paperwork and all these things, they're delayed, weeks, months sometimes. They have to get their crops tested 4 or 5 times before they can actually bring it to market. There's all sorts of labeling requirements. There's all this overhead that they're attaching to those players. So it's kind of pushing out the small guy.
Why do you think that is? It seems like an overreach of regulation. I got some friends that are in the game in California, and they're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Where it's supposed to be something that would give people more accessibility and drive down the prices, the black market is still alive and well over there because of all of those regulations. I'm just curious why that's happening.
Well, I think it's multifolded, but I think one of the aspects to it is because it's a big business now, and just like all the other industries, when big business comes in, they find a way to, usually through regulations and governing bodies, to kind of push out their competition. And because they have the capital to go ahead and afford all this overhead, and they can do so, where the small guy, they know that small guy can't, and eventually they get pushed out. All of a sudden, those crops, those fields, they get bought up on pennies on the dollar. I think it's money driven more than anything, if I were to have to take a guess at it.
Well, think about this. It goes the way of freaking milk, right? Like, oh, you can drink this milk, but you can't drink the natural milk. You can smoke our weed, but you can't smoke the weed you bought from your friend down the street. Like, again, yeah, it's a funneling into that element of control and ultimately giving us the ability to say, yes, now we can smoke weed as long as it's their weed. So then it becomes illegal to smoke again. I don't know. It's kind of a weird concept.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to say welcome.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I want to say welcome to Cole. Thanks for joining us, Cole. For those who may not know, man, can you tell people who you are? Maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey everybody. Sorry I'm late. I didn't see the link. Yeah, Cole Butler, living here in Fort Collins, Colorado. Do a few things. Work as a dosing session monitor and study coordinator on an LSD for anxiety clinical trial. Do some ketamine therapy work, a few other things here and there, but I'll keep it brief. That's who I am. Hi.
Welcome.
Nice, man. Yeah, stoked to be here. Yeah, so I mean, I guess this kind of gets us into everything with Prop 122, right? Like, what do you guys think is going to happen? Are we going to see we've just been covering this. Are we going to see the Maria Sabinas pushed out for the Elon Musks? Is that what's going to happen? You see the small guys pushed out of here and big pharma come in and take things over. What do you think, Cole?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that that's not going to happen, but it feels like it's already sort of happening. And that's just in my personal interactions. My boss, Scott Shannon, he's a psychiatrist and he's very involved in the space. And he's told me, there will be probably thousands of centers opening up with anywhere from the mom and pop shop type places to the $50,000 experience in Vail. But, there's at least one part of the regulations that says you can't have more than any financial interest in more than 5 centers. How that plays out, I don't know. I mean, it feels kind of baked into where it's not going to get out of control. I've already personally experienced a lot of pressure and sort of Game of Thrones feeling about trying to do something with this and kind of being pushed out, or who makes it in, who doesn't, it just feels very kind of, uncomfortable in terms of, just trying to help people, trying to use this to heal people, and then it becoming a big business. So that's where some of my hesitation lies. I mean, I guess we'll see what happens, but it's hard not to see people rushing in to get the gold, just like, the biotech companies right now. There's a new biotech company doing clinical trials every single day. I mean, it seems like overkill, and I don't know. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that the cap on 5 institutions, I read the language on that. I can start up a different business called Holistic Healing Part 3, and I have another 5, and Part 4 and Part 6. And yeah, I mean, there's actually no didn't seem like there was any hard restrictions when in the language there. So I imagine it gets abused pretty readily.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, if we look at what happened to cannabis and we see the licensing nightmares and we see some of the things we were talking about, people getting pushed out, whenever there's big money at stake, there's big egos at stake, and there's long-term market share at stake. Ben, what do you see as the next shoe to drop? I mean, is it going to be like just regulation? Is it going to be licensing that comes in, is pushing people out? Or do you see that, is it possible that maybe there's some sort of, silver lining for the small guy?
I think there's silver lining for the small guy, just in the sense that now we, at an individual level, you have the ability to grow your own mushrooms. I think that's probably the greatest silver lining one could hope from this. I've already seen where there's multiple patents filed for, they take psilocybin or psilocin or something like that, and they add a methyl group, or they're adding some hydrogen in there, and then, all of a sudden it's this new patentable product, and they're already running trials with those those chemical constituents. So I think there'll be some lag time, but ultimately I could definitely see this going the route of, hey, yeah, you guys can have your mushrooms over here, but this is actually, we've done clinical trials with all of, this patented product that we have. And then I can see regulation flowing from that, because they can claim, greater efficacy. They can claim greater safety, because, they have these, the paper trail to back it up.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I wonder, so let me ask you this, Cole, you do a lot in the field right there. And this question's for everybody, but I wanted to start with Cole. Like, if they're able to patent a certain analog, does that mean that just that analog is patented, or does it affect the other types of analogs that are out there?
I think it just pertains to that one, but the concern or the question, I guess, is with intellectual property. So, there's not very much I can say about MindMed, but it's out there on clinicaltrials.gov. What they're using is LSD D-tartrate, which is basically just a salt form of LSD, right? It's the exact same chemical agent, just delivered in a different form. But then, they file those patents, they have exclusive intellectual property rights. So it becomes a whole thing of, they get to sell it, they get to manufacture it, and then it doesn't open the door for freebase LSD to be under the same sort of access, or it doesn't go through the whole FDA process. Just the D-tartrate salt went through the whole FDA process. So I imagine it's a similar sort of thing going on with those. And I know with the MDMA trials, MAPS has not exactly a patent. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but nobody else can do research on MDMA for a certain amount of time. But you see these other companies doing the same thing. They modify it slightly. There's r/MDMA, not Reddit r/MDMA, but r-MDMA. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's the idea, is to push their drug through the FDA process. And it's like, if you want LSD, well, we manufacture it, we sell it, but you can't just buy the freebase version.
Right. Yeah, and thanks to people like the likes of Disney, those patents last 75 years now.
Yeah. What, Jason? Like, what are these questions for everybody? Like, what role does the individual play? Like, it seems to me like there's going to be people out there that don't want the Aspen experience with the Taj Mahal and like the red carpet, and like there's gonna be people that want that and that will pay for that. But what about the teacher next door who's just got divorced or is going through some psychological problems? That might some of these laws be up to us, like people like us choosing where we want to go to get treatment?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, one of the beautiful parts about it is the power of the people being able to go figure this out, and being able to grow and being able to do that, and through that being able to provide maybe certain experiences to people that aren't connected to the business side of things, and spending lots of money, and just trusting that again, at the end of the day, this medicine, for the people that are looking for that healing, they're going to find it. And they'll kind of, again, I really do trust that thing at the end of the day. I think one of the more kind of, again, dark sides of this whole thing is going to be how much they're going to be able to manipulate the experiences so that you don't have to go through the hard stuff, right? Because of the fear, they're going to create fear around like a bad trip or a negative experience or purging or all these different things. And they're going to try to make the experiences as high as they can be without dealing with sometimes the difficult stuff, which we know sometimes is where the work needs to be done. That's the healing nature of the medicine. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to remove some of those healing elements of the medicine, and then be able, because again, how they do anything is how they do everything, right? So it's just kind of like, we don't have to look that far, and without it being conspiracy, like this is literally the pattern, and we know this pattern will apply. So again, for what people are looking for, I think they're going to be able to go find it. If people are really wanting healing, they're going to go to the underground mom and pop shop that's like the weird hippies, That society is like, oh, they do the weird natural mushrooms, right? Like we want to do organic mushrooms over here and none of the pain, right? Like we have all the fun without the hurt. So I don't know, there's gonna, like anything, they're gonna demonize the spirituality, the things that they can't control, and they're gonna find the ways to have some control around that, and then be able to say you're gonna receive the same benefits.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because big pharma is kind of based on treatment, right? They're not really in the business of cures. And, I think we all have experience in this, is that this actually is a pretty profound cure at certain levels for certain people at the right times, which is really shitty for repeat business. So, to your point, Jason, I think they will start to extract pieces of the experience out to where it becomes more of a treatment based thing than actually the search for a cure, for true medicine. Just on
one of the things I was thinking about, I went on a hike here in Colorado, and I bought my national parks pass to Rocky Mountain National Park. And if you go to Rocky Mountain, it's just like a Disney World, it just feels that way. It feels very commercialized. And I thought, well, I spent $70 on this pass. I've only been once in the past year. Let me go out there. So I start driving towards Estes Park, and I pull up on my GPS, and I see a 13-minute delay at the entrance. And I'm like, oh my God, it's another one of those days. It's Saturday. I'm going to sit here for 15 minutes with a line, like 8 lanes wide of cars waiting to get in to do, these trails where I'm just on top of people the whole time. And I said, you know what? No, I pulled up my app and I found Mount Olympus. And I turned around and I literally parked on the side of the road, and I just started trekking up the side of this mountain. And I was like, it was hard. It was difficult. If I didn't have my GPS, I would have got lost. And anyway, don't want to harp on it too much, but moral of the story, most people want the thing that's already built for them. They want the easy, everybody's going kind of Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado mushroom experience. And then there's a specialty, small kind of, let's do it organically. Let's do this the way it's meant to be done. Let's incorporate some ceremony, not turn it into this big whitewashed corporate process. But, I think ultimately people that don't know are going to want to go for what's safe and what's popular. But I think there's a lot of beauty in this sort of small organic type experience. And that part excites me. It's the corporate trying to shut out the small mom and pop shops because they think they're a threat. That scares me.
Yeah, I had an idea. Like I was thinking about, psilocybin as a Trojan horse. Like it seems to me that regardless where you had an experience, if you have a really profound experience, even if you find yourself as like a corporate type, might a profound experience start getting you to ask the question, like, what the hell am I doing? Like, I'm just trying to profit off this. It seems to me, at least for me, when I take psilocybin, I begin thinking to myself, like, okay, taking advantage of people is wrong. Doing this for this reason is wrong. And I'm wondering what you guys think about psilocybin as a Trojan horse. Might it be that, some of the big corporations start dosing people, even their own executives, and then their own executives are like, wait a minute, we're doing this all wrong, man. We should be trying to help out the people sort of profit off of it. Is that just pie in the sky or what?
I think there'll be cases where it certainly happens. I mean, I've encountered people on my travels who, they fit that bill, and then all of a sudden they do wake up one day and they're like, oh, what the hell am I doing? At the same time, I think the vast majority is going to fall to the safety, like Cole was saying, and it's going to be a mechanism of marketing. All these big pharma companies are going to have the money to put out the marketing. They're going to be able to pay for the FDA trials. They're going to be able to do all these things where now they'll be able to go out into the marketplace and make all of these safety claims and efficacy claims. And then, that's where the majority of people are going to go. We're already hardwired for consumerism. And I think that's going to be kind of the thing. I don't know that you're going to get the Trojan horse effect where all of a sudden, the system's going to come crashing down because this got let in. But I do see it happening in small scale, but I don't think you're going to have the board of Pfizer all of a sudden realize they're a whole bunch of, deplorable people overnight.
I think too, it's interesting, and it's something that's always, I think, been a bit debated, at least from what I've seen of the movement in the last, 70 years or so, that how much impact does set and setting really have on the intent and what experience you want to have. And Michael Pollan even addresses this in his book, in How to Change Your Mind, of being I think he called himself a materialist and not one that really believed in spiritual things. That is there this kind of preconception set and setting that when you have these medicine experiences, you're going to experience some sort of spiritual thing. And, are we almost conditioned to associate these two things, right? And it's interesting because he has his experience and he's like, well, I did experience something. I don't know what it was, but, he begins to change his mind. But it'll be interesting to see how much influence and conditioning they can do on someone before they go into that experience, and how they can kind of manipulate that. I don't know. That's one part that feels like it's a vulnerability of the medicine, is that it can be manipulative or manipulated. I don't know. Or can it? What do you guys think? Is that, can the medicine be manipulated?
I recently talked to Rick Strassman on this idea. I want to read this email that he sent to me.
Yeah.
It was just some, hey, how's it going? And then I had mentioned to him, are you worried about exactly what we talked about? Are you worried about the Maria Sabinas being pushed out for the Elon Musk? Here's what he says. What scares me more than the possibility of pushing out Maria Sabina for Elon Musk is pushing her out for PK Dick. Have you read his book, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch? If so, it provides an interesting and terrifying perspective on the psychedelic boom. For those that haven't read that book, dude, it's just about the corporate takeover of the mind. People are all dosed up, and all you do is see this corporate world. And when I didn't even think about that, but that is incredibly terrifying. And especially when you start looking at what Jason just said right there about what kind of propaganda goes into the treatment center. How would they, in fact, it's not that they would separate the spirituality from the drugs. They would replace the spirituality with the company. The company would take the place of the spiritual nature. That would become the God head there. And if you just pan back, you can see it. People talk about the holy man syndrome, and all of us have probably felt it at some point in time. We've become evangelists for mushrooms. We're at some point in times, I felt oh my God, I got all the answers, even though I don't. But it's easy to slip into that idea right there. Imagine on a high corporate level at a church-like setting, because that's what these places will be. They won't be churches, but the corporate structure will be a church-like setting where you go to almost worship to have your experience. It's replacing the very foundation of spirituality with consumerism and this drug. So I could see this weird twisting happen there. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I've already observed the church of corporatism being rolled out in full force, just through my startup ventures. I won't name names or anything, but it was very much all of a sudden we're sitting there and I was like, wow, this is like an evangelical church service. People are putting their hands up. People are expressing all these things, but it's very corporate centric. All about, getting, they were essentially replacing that void of spiritualism with, some sort of corporate version of it to try to, create better workers and foster better businesses and create better investments. And so that's already in full force. So when you add the ability of a psychoactive substance on top of all of that, I think you can have a recipe where, people are going to end up in some pretty existential, interesting places. And I have a feeling there'll be a lot of existential crises. Now, I don't think that those will be in the sense that, they're going to wake up and realize that everything they're doing is bad. I think it's because it's not. I think we're a little bit further along in those paths, right? We've been banging on these walls for years and years and years. I think we often forget what it's like to just start on the path. And then if you were to imagine just starting on the path and then having this massive corporate entity basically controlling every single aspect of that, telling you what to say, when to say it, where to go, where, when to show up, how to take this, what to do, what not to do, all of these things, all of a sudden, exactly like you said, it replaces the Godhead. It fills that spiritual void, but not with something of substance, but of consumerism, of let's we do this for X, Y, and Z, not for healing, not for the benefit of society, not for anything like that. It takes a different angle, I think.
I think it reminds me of our conversation last week when we were talking about the, I think it was in 1984, and the concept of new speak, right? And I was thinking a lot about this over this last week, and thinking first on how we've shifted our culture into that of what they're calling a second orality culture, right? So like before we had, this literature and the book of the printing press, we lived in an oral culture. And especially when you go back, you can see oral tradition. And there is this almost shift of what's happened over the last 25, 30 years of where we've shifted from really gaining the majority of our knowledge through the written word and actually through listening to it. By podcasting, videos, everything, like we really now are functioning more like an oral society than we are one that is driven by the written word. And so how we communicate, there's been these shifts. And so when you think about the idea of new speak, what is the best way that you can begin to like really infuse a culture is by the language that you use, what you can and cannot say. And it almost is like this shift into a second orality became easier to control some elements of, and again, we can see the control and the printing and whatnot. But I was thinking about that, just how we're so dependent now on listening to people and listening to our even using our voice, right? And in the car, like we can speak things and they happen. We don't have to write stuff down anymore. These vocal assistants that are coming into our lives. And so this new speak's coming in, and so you start watching like, how is this happening within the psychedelic movement? And it's interesting because so much of the language is PTSD, depression, anxiety, mental health. That's how they're talking about the healing of this stuff. And right now we're like at a grassroots enough method that we all are like, yes, we've seen the impact of that. But you don't have to get too much out of the grassroots where all of a sudden those things start to mean other stuff. And what does it mean to be depressed? Or what does it mean to have anxiety? Or what does it mean to have PTSD? And they're going to be able to manipulate that, I think, in some ways that they're going to be new speak that we're going to watch develop right before our eyes.
I agree with that a lot. And just kind of an example of that, when it first began, look how many people gave their children Ritalin, Adderall, all of these things, just drugging up kids. And it was all on the word of a doctor or a psychologist or something like that. And you're not allowed to question the authority structure, but if everybody else is doing it, we might as, it must be good for my kid. They give it to 20 other kids in the school. And so I think, we've already started to see these cycles, these patterns kind of play out in society. And I think a lot of what we'll see, especially from the corporate side of things, is exactly that.
Well, I think the way to address, the broad corporate takeover, we're not going to be able to drug all these executives and change their minds, unfortunately, but as much as I'd like that, I think it just has to start with the individual, and we have to be each our own proponents of how the healing is supposed to look like, and just bring awareness to what that corporate structure looks like. And we're doing it now by talking about it and sort of bringing to light what it looks like for big money, big corporations to step into this space and take on this sort of form or figure in place of the true, spiritual nature of the medicine, and sort of start to try to just rip out the value and sell it and make a bunch of money. But yeah, I think the way to hopefully try and prevent that is just to, each of us ourselves be voices for what this should look like, what it could look like, how to do it correctly, and keep talking about it. Certainly the corporate sort of big money model has been what's been scaring me about this thing passing in the past few weeks, because there's no stopping it. It's just like this big tidal wave of big money rushing in and just trying to get a cash grab on this. And that seems so antithetical and, to the medicine. It makes me so uncomfortable. But in terms of shifts in consciousness, it's got to happen little by little. And I think taking the medicine is helpful in that direction.
I agree.
Yeah, that's well said.
Go ahead, George.
I think that the weird hippie couples giving organic mushrooms have a different way of applying it that is more effective. And I want to share what I think that is. We talked about the corporate structure, and they seem to be based on repeat customers. They're going to want people to coming in, and you can see the pattern of PTSD. You got to come in once every 3 months for your treatment. It's going to help. And with that kind of language, like Jason was saying, begins the pattern of use. Where what I think the proper way is, and I'm curious if you guys agree with this, is that you could take it 1 or 2 times and learn how to solve that problem for yourself and then move on to the next problem. Like if you have depression, you should be able to take it once or twice, figure out what your problem is, and then solve that problem. And then the depression goes away. The depression isn't a long lasting thing. The depression is a roadblock that got stuck in your way back here. So you sit down with a practitioner, someone that knows what they're doing. You remove that roadblock, then they can move forward. They might not need it again. They might need it one time. If they wanted to do it again to solve something else. And I think that's the difference between, and I think that's going to be the difference between small groups and people that really care about the individual and solving problems versus the corporate model. The corporate structure is probably going to have some sort of incentive structure for the doctors, an incentive structure to push more medicine, and like that to me might be enough of a downfall for the smaller people to at least get a foothold. What do you guys think?
I mean, honestly, again, this is where I trust the medicine. Like, I trust that, like, it has been healing people for millennia. Right. It has popped up. It's disappeared from societies. It's reemerged. It's had this again, bigger thing. And again, I think for people that are truly looking for the healing, they're gonna break out. But that's gonna be the interesting thing is they're going to have to break out of a lot of new speak, and they're going to have to be like, oh, I'm going to go trust someone in their basement and do this versus the nice, clean, experience of what I would have at this beautiful facility. Like they're going to have to be willing to break out. And I think those that are, there's going to be a lot of us that are going to be ready to welcome them with open arms. And I just trust that's going to be the process at the end of the day, that those that are there, that want it will be able to find it. Otherwise, yeah, it's inevitable that the corporatocracy is doing this. It's not like on some levels, I feel like it can stop.
No, I don't think it stops. And if we look at, just the underlying structure of everything in our society is built for it to just continue to plow down the road unhindered. This is the whole reason this got passed is because there was $5 million invested in getting it passed. There was one group who took up a stance against it, and they managed to raise a grand total of $26,000. Right. Yeah. And
do you know where that money came from?
Not off the top of my head, but I did look into it a little bit. I
didn't know, is that public information?
Most of it came from a group in Washington, D.C. I'd have to double check the name, but I know 3 million of it, probably the initial funding, was from the group that was behind campaigning for the initiative. And then a lot of it was donations. And I actually hopped on a call like a week before the bill was passed that said they were up to almost $9 million.
Oh, really?
In funding. Yeah. Huh. So anyway, not to interrupt, but.
No. Chime in whenever. Yeah. So $9 million is a big number, right? We couldn't come up with $9 million if they held our family at gunpoint, probably. And so I think we're going to see, it's just like what happens in DC these days. Lobbyists from big corporate interests get a whole bunch of money. They write these bills. These bills get presented to senators or in Congress people who are going to vote a certain way based upon the donations that they received from these same people. And that's just kind of the system that we have at a regulatory and legal level in this country right now. And to suspect that it would change for this, I just don't see it happening.
When I
I
was
don't want to. Sorry, George, you can go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I just had one point, I guess, I want to bring up, which is sort of relevant here, which I've been reading about. And I don't know the guy's name 100%. I think it was Mason Marks, but he was like MD, JD, like Harvard School of Law. I mean, he wrote this just intense article about data privacy, um, which, for me is a pretty big issue. And it seems like the state of Colorado, or I don't know who, I think these funding groups are going to have sort of exclusive access to the data. And there's a big concern around PHI, public health, private health information, who has access to that. And then this sort of gold mine of data that's going to come from all of this. And there's really no provisions for people to opt out of their data being collected or legal protections if it's not considered PHI. And that's really a big, big concern of mine. Moving forward, it seems like these interest groups, are not donating money to the cause, but investing money in the cause
Exactly.
to, get access to a bunch of very, very valuable data that's very hard and very expensive to obtain if you're doing it in the clinical trials route.
And big data is a big business.
You control the information. You can control where everything goes, right? You can control what's happening, what's not happening. And that brings me to another part. I was reading through the and it talks about the Natural Medicine Advisory Board. When you start getting boards together, you get 50, you got like a little gang, right? You got 15 people up there. How do you get a board seat? Well, it's probably not going to be me or you. It's probably not going to be the small guy up there.
Right.
Yeah, I know a little bit about this. You can make recommendations for who's going to sit on it, but one of the individuals behind passing the act, Kevin Matthews, had told my boss, or my boss told me via him, I guess, that he's probably going to be making recommendations on who sits on the board, and then Dora will decide. They're going to be like, who's the experts here? Who do you think we should put on this board? And then they get to decide, and then they make the decisions. But you can sort of advocate for who you'd like to sit there, and you can apply to have that done.
Sure, but what board is going to elect the shaman, the crazy bearded shaman who's up in the mountains, when they're being set up against some guy who's ran 17 clinical trials? It becomes just an echo chamber at some level, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's not in the interest of the board to put crazy shamans, not crazy, but,
oh, they might be. You never know.
Yeah, who knows? Shamans in political seats.
It's weird how sometimes the world we live in echoes literature. And when I think about that, I think about Brave New World and The Island. In both those books, they use soma, or the moksha medicine, but it seems similar to me. And in one hand, like I almost think that these are the two or these are the two settings, right? Like Brave New World, where you use soma to get through the stress times, seems to be the road in which big pharma is using it. Where on the island, the moksha medicine, you have kids taking it, going through trials and tribulations and rituals, and using it to better themselves and have like a form of self-optimization in a positive way. It's weird how it could be written so long ago, the paths that are out there. Cole, I know you're a fan of both of those books. What do you think is how do we get more of the island from Brave New World?
Well, it's been a couple years since I read Island, maybe more than a couple, but if I remember correctly, they say explicitly it's actually psilocybin that they're using, and there's a whole beautiful, I want to say chapter, at least section, where their 16-year-olds basically go through an initiation ceremony with psilocybin, and they're raised rock climbing and close to nature and doing these kinds of things. But there is the contrast in Brave New World between the sort of soma-controlled society and the sort of brash tribalism, and kind of like seeing the positives and negatives of both of those. But I think Island does a good job of painting that picture of not just the medicine, but the broader societal sort of setup of how do we set up our society's policies to be better? Like kids get to go to other people's houses and they run around freely and they're always around parents and these kinds of things. And just kind of like integrating society more. And so for me, that's a very big element. Like the society has to, you know, be in alignment with the medicine. And right now, our Western society is very corporate capitalistic, and this, this medicine sort of doesn't fit in with our other medicines, and we're trying to fit it into that system, and it's not working. But we need to make the societal level changes, really, to see the healing that we want.
I think, we talked about this in plenty of times on the roundtable, but the rise of parallel economies, parallel systems, parallel societies, I think that's probably where we'll actually see these things thrive. Because we do exist at a time where we can define, a framework for a society, for a community. And, we can run these experiments. And I think, there's already a lot of interest to do so. I know a lot of people are working on it besides me. And I think probably over the next couple of years, you'll have these centers, you'll have the corporate side of it, but we'll start to see rises of more, kind of like throwback to your hippie communes, but very different, much more structured, much more organized, different types of societal merit systems, things based on meritocracies. You're going to have, big city centers probably rolling out experiments with universal basic incomes coming down the pike here pretty quick. And so I think we'll start to see a lot of these. And I bet you that's where, the medicine thrives, is in those types of environments.
Mm.
Yeah. I wanted to add to it. I think that there's a different aspect as far as, like, we've been talking about the psychedelic effects of psilocybin and the psychedelic effects of treatment and what it can treat. But I want to talk about something you can learn just not just by taking it, but by watching it. Like if you grow mushrooms, like let's think about the terminology. You're going to colonize a jar of seeds. You're going to colonize like something. Like this is kind of what Ben is talking about. When you say starting new systems, I say let's look at the way the fungus grows, and then we can apply that to the way we could build a society. And I know colonization gets it's kind of a bad tangent to it, but just think about like us as the first inoculation going out, and now we're beginning to colonize. Like it's me meeting Cole, it's Ben meeting Jason, it's us reaching through the airwaves right now and talking to Colorado, talking to people in Switzerland, reaching out to people in Alaska. Like we're actually beginning to colonize and form the same way the mycelium branches out and moves ideas and moves nutrients to other parts. So too are we acting like the mycelium. We're acting like we're acting out the medicine. And pretty soon you're going to see these fruits grow. And I think that, I can tell you my podcast alone has just, I don't even know how this happened, but it's when I began seriously when I really began looking at my life through the idea of you don't come into this world, you come out of it. And I think about mushrooms all the time like that. Like, we are growing as a network. And I think if more people understood that, we move like that, we grow like that. I think if we can get away from the language of mine and switch it up to ours, like it's the second you say it's mine or it's his, you have erased the fact that we work together. And I think that's kind of what mushroom shows us. If you look the way it grows, it has to reach a certain level before it fruits, and that's what we have to do as a network. Like, so I'm just trying to make the point that you can learn a lot about the world and the environment you live in, not necessarily by taking mushrooms, but just like watching mushrooms. Have you guys ever thought about it from that perspective?
Well, I think. So I was going to say the one thing I think is interesting about that is also remembering that this beautiful mycelium network supports lots of mushrooms, not just the ones that give us magic. They also support the mushrooms that freaking, take over the ants and invade entire colonies and wipe out ants through its seed. And it's the kind of mushrooms that can, like in Paul's or the film Fantastic Fungi, where they're talking about the ability to use mycelium and mushrooms to like break down oil and the evils. Like, so I think on some levels, like the answer is yes. Like the mushroom, it shows us this beautiful network, but it's also going to do a lot of different things for us. besides just give us the magic and the connection to something bigger than ourselves.
The best systems that I've ever observed designed and operating are systems that reflect nature.
Mm.
Yeah,
And I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, I think about mushrooms a lot too. Used to read a lot about them, still do sometimes. Actually, I've got a soup going right now. Got 3 different kinds of mushrooms.
Nice.
I found those little, I don't know, they're grown in China, but I don't even know what they're called, but it's a bunch of little tiny ones, and oysters.
Oh.
No, I wish. Anyway, yeah, and then as Jason was speaking, I was also thinking about how mushrooms, and mycelium integrates underneath the ground with other organisms and supports other systems and organisms. And there's a whole interconnected, deeper nature between the mushrooms and the rest of life, certainly between our brains and psilocybin, which is just completely mind-blowing in and of itself. But the mushrooms, can give us nutrients, if we eat the right ones. And they also give, nutrients to the trees and the root systems, and they feed back and forth. And I think that's really beautiful as well.
I mean, mushrooms are really interesting in the fact that they inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, similar to us, right? We have a fungal system in our body, and very neglected fungal system for most people, as it were. And I think that's why, the advent of, not just the medicinal mushrooms, but also, the healthy mushrooms. And Paul Stamets has done fantastic work on things like turkey tail, fly agarikon, reishi, cordyceps, and there's, lion's mane. And, we found awesome properties from these because they engage something that's inherent in us. And I think that's a very, it's a nice fundamental aspect. It's like a cannabinoid system. We have all these systems in our body, and the more that we can nurture them, and then, as above, so below, which we talk about a lot on this show, these are things that we can then take from the internal to the external. And there's lessons to be learned, there's metaphors to be had, and there's a lot of good times with it as well, I think.
Ben, you had mentioned a while back something about ionophores, but I don't know that we fully got into that. And could you maybe explain that again?
Sure. Ionophores are basically, they're the charge carrier in the body. So when your cell produces a charge, the ionophores take that charge and propagate it to the surrounding tissue. The more ionophore content that you have, the greater that charge density can be. And from the literature, it says that ionophores are generated mainly via fungus and bacteria in the human body. So the idea, and this gets into like the bioelectric field, which is getting a lot of interest now, is kind of, we have biochemistry and then bioelectricity, because there's different bioelectric states that seem to have an effect. And we kind of know this from the literature, right? We used to shock people, and we still do. You hook up, people to electric shock therapy, that still happens. You're basically manipulating the bioelectric field to create some sort of physical response at either the biochemical level, the neuronal level, or, just the like physical level in terms of like healing. And so there's a lot of active research on this, and I think we'll see a lot more in the coming years. But to me, it seems that magic mushrooms especially really kind of upregulate this bioelectric activity via this ionophore channel. At least that's kind of what I'm putting together. It's still active research, but yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about. As I was thinking about our previous conversation a little bit earlier, what can we try to steal? Let's try to steel man the pharmaceutical end of it. Like, what are some good things that could come out of these guys? Like having the money get in there, and then maybe finding some new analogs, or like, can you think of some really good things, Cole, that could come out of pharma bringing big money into this area?
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest one is safety data, and accessibility via insurance coverage. And I mean, I'm very much the hippie guy. in many senses, but I also work on these psychedelic clinical trials, and it's a very laborious process to do it and to do it safely. I mean, it's a lot of the times it feels like overkill, but it's like, hey, we're going to give LSD to people. Like, we're going to take a lot of safeguards if we're going to do this above board. Way too many, in my opinion, but you set it up very carefully and cleanly so that you can get good, clean data. And a lot of what the FDA cares about is safety. So you have your primary outcome measures, which are very scientific. Did it work? How much did it work? How strong was it, kind of thing, and a follow up. And then you've got, what are the adverse events? Are there serious adverse events? Is somebody committing suicide? And you record every single adverse event, whether somebody stubs their toe in their own home while they're enrolled in the trial. It has nothing to do with the drugs. And they come in and they say, I stubbed my toe. Well, then you say, okay, well, that probably wasn't related to the drug. It was moderate or mild, and, the thing that you get with that is a lot of very valuable data on safety. And then, without the insurance companies having that safety data, they can't say what the risk profile is to make it more accessible. And I'm sure we could get deep down a rabbit hole of the healthcare system and the insurance model and how that plays into pharmaceuticals. I certainly could. But anyway, these treatments are extremely expensive. Providers' time is very expensive. Obviously, we want, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but male-female therapy pair seems to be the best kind of model for like full-day MDMA sessions, and probably others as well. That's kind of how we're doing it in the LSD trial, and paying for providers' time, nurse practitioners, $250 an hour, psychiatrists, $300 an hour, LPC therapists, $150 an hour, and, you're talking about 8-hour days. And then you're talking about preparation, integration work. So pretty soon, and facility fees, pretty soon you get into the tens of thousands of dollars range for treatment. And that's just only accessible to a small slice of the population. So in terms of accessibility to the, lay public, the general public, we need insurance reimbursement, but we're not going to have that without having a lot of data on safety.
Wow. That's deep.
I mean, I agree with that if we're steel manning the argument. I disagree with that from the perspective of, what's the LD50 on psilocybin? There isn't one recorded to my knowledge, right? Same likewise for LSD. I don't think there's an LD50. But, so we have these substances that are very much proven from other types of data to be very, very safe. But I know where you're coming from the insurance perspective and the alternative risks, the suicides, the things like that. That has to be there for insurance to take part of this, and that gets into the rabbit hole of that model. But to counter the steel man argument, I think these things have been growing on this planet for millennia, and they've potentially have influenced society multiple times over, and I think they're going to do it again. And I think having the ability for everybody to grow mushrooms is probably that first step of that evolution of things. We're steel manning it, so I don't want to push back on it too much, but it's just, it's hard for me to steel man this one. Medicine for money, medicine for profit is something that just grates me the very wrong way.
Yeah. Jason, you got any thoughts on that?
I just appreciated that deep dive Cole took us on, and thinking about just the costs and how they're kind of creating this infrastructure of that it has to be done these certain ways. And it'll also be interesting to say, maybe again, for insurance to take this stuff, we're still years out from any of this really coming into the mainstream. I mean, still, even just looking at the path of marijuana, I think it feels like this is going to move a little bit faster, possibly because marijuana's kind of been laying the groundwork over the last decade. And so it's like, if we were able to get marijuana working on a federal level, that conversation is now coming into the mainstream. This kind of feels like it won't take maybe as long, but we're still, let's just say, a decade out from this really coming into the mainstream. And so it'll be interesting to see societally how, on some levels, do the upper echelon, the bigger divide between the haves and the have-nots. The haves have this piece to their life because they're having these experiences and they have access to it, and they're getting this healing. And we see kind of the further separation from those that maybe can't get access to it. And that's where I think that will be really, again, trusting the power of people to be able to facilitate it in smaller, more mom and pop shops, and hoping that can be a faster movement on some levels. Once this stuff gets all kind of legalized, like, great. Now, again, looking at the measure, I can apply for a license. I have a healing center. I don't have to maybe do all of the same pieces for the scientific testing and whatnot. And I can start just being able to work with people and provide healing. The faster we can get there, the better. So again, we know the other side's going to happen. So how do we then just look at the positives? Like, great, this will give us the access in the mainstream. Like, more and more people are talking about it. And now we can start being able to just, the people that want it, be able to provide it for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It gets me thinking too. Like Cole, Ben, and Jason, I don't have any clinical trial experience, but I'm speaking to maybe you guys that do. Like, how do you, like, let's just say a generic clinical trial for LSD. Like, how do you create a trial to tell how strong something is? Like, how do you measure the strength of something in like that, Cole?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I mean, that's kind of the trial I'm working on. So it's a dose finding study. So they're testing a placebo, 25 micrograms, 50, 100, and 200, and then randomizing to any one of those 5 treatment arms. You get 1 dose, and then you see what happens with anxiety, and you plot it on a dose response curve. So the primary outcome measure for us is the Hamilton A anxiety measure. So you basically have a random blinded person assess their anxiety with a semi-structured diagnostic interview, and then you give them the LSD and come back and see what happens. And then, once you have that data, you can plot it on the curve. I don't know about like how strong the medicine is as much as like how much it works. I guess that's more pharmacokinetic kind of stuff, unless you're just talking about subjective effects.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was curious what a clinical trial looks like from that angle. It seems interesting on attempting to measure some things that are subjective, and it sounds like there's ways to kind of get around it. I was reading in the story about they would look at rats and watch their head twitch, but like that doesn't seem to be a real good measurement.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these scales are kind of subjective scales, and the idea, kind of the underlying philosophy is if you repeat it enough, you'll get kind of a correlation to the data. So then you can get some takeaways from that kind of give you the idea that, hey, in 80% of subjects it was reported that they weren't on the placebo, that they had this subjective experience. And then you can take away pieces of data like that. So you got to use the masses to pull out, kind of more explicit information.
And I mean, you could get deep into the whole question of whether or not subjective reporting is a valid way to measure anxiety.
There's a lot of argument about that. Yeah.
But, that's pretty much the basis of the field of psychology, is just like asking people questions about what they think or feel. And, I guess you just kind of have to trust that. And it seems like that's a fairly reliable measure, just to be able to say, how anxious are you feeling? What's it feel like in your chest? I don't know, things like that. And, if you have a blinded person do it that has no idea who they are, you hand them a laptop and then they're zoomed in with some PhD somewhere that's doing the assessment. It's like they shouldn't have any idea of what treatment arm they got. They care a lot about that in clinical trials, for sure, the blinding and expectancy effects and placebo response reduction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Gentlemen, I've been a little bit under the weather. I'm gonna start landing the plane here, man. But before we go, I just wanted to maybe start with Ben here and give me your thoughts on what do you think is the best case scenario for Prop 122, and what do you think is the worst case scenario for 122, Ben?
Well, I'm pretty sure we covered the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll go back into that. I think the best case scenario, we kind of touched on it too, and I think Jason really touched on it. I think we have the opportunity now to have a grassroots movement outrun the slow, laborious, and cumbersome corporate entity structure and insurance models and all these things that have to be accounted for and upheld. So I think that's the best case scenario. Is we do have people on the ground. We have three of us here in Colorado. We have people on the ground who are already years and years and years into this effort. And I think that there is a window of opportunity for, and I think it will arise in kind of those parallel society, parallel community type situations. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity at the end of the day for just the actual aspect of the application of medicine and what this actually means to society at a larger whole.
Yeah, that's well said. Jason, what are your final thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, I think the positive, again, when I was reading over the actual act, I wanted to read like the first part because I thought this was actually the best part of the whole thing. And it says that the voters of the state of Colorado find and declare that Colorado's current approach to mental health has failed to fulfill its promise. Coloradoans deserve more tools to address mental health issues, including approaches such as natural medicines that are grounded in treatment, recovery, health, and wellness rather than criminalization, stigma, suffering, and punishment. I mean, come on. That's I think that's a statement we could all agree with, right?
Yeah.
And that's the good news, right? And so I think, we've talked a lot of doom and gloom, and we can definitely see some of the negative. But to echo Ben's point, if we can outrun this thing and enough people begin waking up and enough people begin to start to see that the system has not been supportive to them, then we will see this as maybe the mycelium network to birth the next thing that's going to be coming. Because we know a lot of structures are about to come down on some levels. And so maybe this is the groundwork that's needed of getting the right people awake so that when the shift happens, we have the right army ready to go and fight that battle. So that to me is the best case scenario of what we can be working on in the short term, next 3 to 5 years, is just building that army of people that are awake to Gaia.
Movement of the people.
I like it.
That's
I
what
like
I'm
it.
hoping for.
Cole, what would you say in summary to the situation?
Yeah, that's a hard one to follow, Jason.
I know, man.
Sorry.
Well done.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't see it's hard to say best case, worst case, because I feel like the picture we've kind of painted is the worst case is this big corporatization, and the best case is just kind of access to natural healing, and there's no way that the corporatization isn't going to show up. So it's really just kind of what happens, I guess, and hopefully the direction it moves in. And I think all of that just rests on the accessibility piece, and the doors are open. So I mean, I guess best case scenario is the corporate doesn't squash out everybody else. And hopefully it opens the doors to people with good intentions that really want to practice this work for the right reasons, that aren't overly hyped or money crazy or just excited to catch the newest hot wave to step in and really do the work. Because there's people like myself who have really been doing this work for a long time. And I was sitting in a group ketamine session the other day, and I was like, you know what, this is kind of boring. Sitting here, there's 3 people with their eye shades on, and we're sitting here for an hour. But I'm here and I'm doing the work. And I mean, granted, it's good to hold space for them, and a lot of the exciting stuff comes afterwards when they tell you what the hell they saw. But it was just well, there's no reason to get overly rushed or overly excited. I mean, sometimes it's scary in there, sometimes it's boring, but it's just okay, I'm right here with somebody that's going through it right now. I'm doing it. It's not this big crazy thing. It's not my life is amazing. It's not, wow, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this work. I'm just super aligned and focused right now. It's just, work, and it's important work, and it's good work, and it's gratifying. But, at the end of the day, it's just like the people that are in it for the right reasons are just going to keep showing up no matter how much hype there is. And hopefully that is a stable enough thing to keep us going, to keep us alive, to move us in the right direction.
Man, that's really well said. And I believe, like, I've met so many people with their hearts in the right spot that actually care about what happens to other people. And I think that there's a lot more of us than there are of them. And I know you shouldn't use us and them or whatever. Ultimately, we're probably all the same, but there's so many good people, and I'm sitting next to 3 of them right here. Cole, you've recently started kind of a new venture. Why don't you tell people about that?
Oh yeah, thanks, man. I have a small coaching and consulting business. So I've been coaching people around recovery from problematic cannabis use. Not all cannabis use is problematic, I understand, but for some people like myself, it is and has been. So started doing that, and also can do some psychedelic integration coaching or sort of career alignment stuff. And the consulting is kind of around if you have a career and you're looking to be more involved with psychedelics, I can help guide people in that direction. Mostly for me, it's been a more traditional research environment into a psychedelic research environment. So that's kind of my wheelhouse. But I'm open to exploring kind of other shifts into psychedelic careers and what that might look like, whether that's in therapy, also do that. So just kind of like a side project to help get more people in the space, help people out.
Where can people find you at?
It's lionheartwellness.net or Cole Butler on LinkedIn.
Nice. I would recommend everybody check out Cole. He's an amazing individual. He genuinely cares about making the world better. And if you just read some of his posts, you'll have to stop for a minute and be like, it's amazing. How come I didn't think of that? You know what I mean? But he's really awesome. Ben, what do you got going on, my friend? I've seen the podcast blowing up over there, and I'm surprised you haven't mentioned No Absolutes, the book, once yet.
Well, I try to not to plug it all the time.
Why not? Plug it. Come on.
I've been taking care of my little 1-year-old nephew recently, so I've been a little behind the scenes more than anything. I'm working on a lot of automation to kind of help build this network and put it to the next level. More podcasts should be coming out here pretty soon. I just need to find the time. So that should be in the next week or so. But check me out at benjamincgeorge.com for the book, the podcast, and anything else that might be coming down the pike.
Yeah, and for those listening, there's a reason they call him Mr. Wizard. The more that I spend time with Ben, the more I realize how much of a wizard he is, man. Thank you, Ben, for everything. Jason, what's going on, man? I know you've got some things in the works.
Yeah, just continuing my podcast called Telling Secrets with my partner. That we have an episode coming out pretty much every week on that, which is always a lot of fun. And then I've been working on kind of starting a solo podcast focusing on masculinity and fatherhood that should be coming out with its first couple episodes in the next few weeks. So looking forward to seeing that kind of come online.
Yeah, me too, man. I've had a real great time getting to hang out with you a little bit, and I'm impressed with the work you're doing, and I think you're one hell of a communicator, man. So thanks for being a part of it.
Thanks, man.
So that's what I got for today, ladies and gentlemen. This was an epic show. Thank you to every one of you for spending some time with me today. Usually we do 2 hours, but I'm a little down and out right now. So I'm really thankful, though. Yeah. All right, guys. I will talk to you next week. Thank you so much, buddy. Aloha.
Thank you. See you.